Welcome to Agape Social Justice. This is where we talk about love, truth, and justice. My name is Stephanie Kreider, and today we'll have a guest with us. Amy Mendel is here to represent our West Bloomfield Social Justice Committee. Amy and I have actually known each other for probably about 2.5 years or so. I value Amy's input. I have a high degree of respect for her in terms of the work that she does in anti-racism. And Amy, to me, is an example of what allyship should look like. And so I wanted to bring her on today to talk about her journey, how she got to where she is today, what advice she has for those of us who are embarking upon this work, and what's next. So, Amy, welcome to today's show.
Thank you.
I appreciate you being here today. I gave a brief introduction of who you are, but please feel free to tell us a little bit more about your story and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I'm born and raised here in Michigan, and I've lived in West Bloomfield for about 25 years. And I just was always sort of a regular person going about my life. But something happened after George Floyd was murdered, and something changed in me. And like many Americans, I knew I could no longer just sit by and live my life when such a great injustice occurred in front of all of our eyes.
I agree. I think actually for me, if I'm honest, I've always had the lived experience I have, but when the pandemic hit, and I think we were all home and we had to witness it in a way that we have never had to before. People who normally would avoid it were forced to see it. I do think that there was a shift. And there was even a shift in me. I think I took it up another notch. And so talk to me a little bit about what that felt like for you as this was playing out. You know, we had multiple murders that took place.
Yes.
And so people took to the streets.
Yes.
People were protesting. There were conversations on every news
Yes.
network. Walk me through what that felt like when you first really jumped knee deep into this work.
And I did. I also went to protests and, held up signs, and it still didn't feel like enough. And I started reading and I started listening to podcasts, and it still didn't feel like enough because I felt that the white people around me could dip in and dip out, and we weren't actually changing the way we saw America. We were still in our white bubble, and we were still outside of the problem. And then I read an article called When Racism Occurs, White People Form Book Clubs. And that was really a shocking article. It was written by a Black writer. And I sent that around to some of my friends. And I just felt that we had to do more than just read and talk. So I decided a friend had told me about a book called White Supremacy and Me by Layla Saad. And I read through it, and it gave very concrete steps to changing your understanding and becoming an anti-racism activist. And I wanted to read it with other people. So I went to my local activists and asked them if we could read the book together, thinking I would get 3 people. We'd read the book over the course of a few weeks and figure out what to do after that. The response was overwhelming. I had more than 20 people email me asking to be involved, and not just white people, but Black people as well. And then I thought, oh no, I don't know anything. How am I going to lead this? I just wanted to read this book. So you stepped up right away from the start, and you and our other friend, Margaret Hall, both said to me, this is important work. This needs to be done, and we will stand right by your side, and you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to say the wrong thing, but we're going to be patient with you and support you as you lead your group through this. So the first thing I did was take just the white people, and we met every other week for about 4 months, working our way through this book, learning about the white bubble, white centering, tone policing, all these things that we just did naturally. The white privilege, white fragility.
Right.
And I remember I called some of the Black people who signed up for the group as we embarked on this, and I wanted to tell them, because the book recommends that white people work on this alone. Partially because it can be hurtful and harmful for Black people to have to endure our cluelessness. And we didn't want to inflict any more harm on our friends and our allies. And I remember I called up some of the Black people in the group to share this idea of separating. And I said, I'm not really sure how to move forward. I'm not really sure what to do next. And I remember Daryl Reed said to me, well, I think you should do what you said you were going to do at the meeting. And I said, you mean talk with white people about the white supremacy? It was like hard to even say those words. And he's like, yeah, that's what you need to do.
Right. Well, I'm glad you did. Obviously, I'm glad you did. And if I'm honest, when we started, when I first heard you talking about, we were on a club meeting, and I heard you talking about this vision that you had and how you were going to uniquely approach it. And that actually caused me to pause and say, okay, wait a minute, let me check out this lady. And really delve into what you wanted to do. And so I was really appreciative that we had an opportunity to be there to kind of be a listening ear, because I understood how challenging it would be, but also because it gave me an opportunity to really assess how this was going to play out, what the process would be that you were taking. You were very intentional in making sure that you weren't going to create any racial trauma for the Black community. And so oftentimes we won't recommend going into a space if we feel like, a lot of us just can't handle it, because we're living it every day. And not only are we living it every day, it's usually the same handful of people who are called to do this type of work. And it becomes very taxing. It can become very traumatic. And so I honestly thought the way you were approaching it was not only the first time I'd ever heard it, but I thought it showed a lot about your character and your heart for the work. And so I gained a lot of trust from that day. So when you called the other Black people, did everybody respond the same way?
Pretty much.
Okay. And I'm not surprised, right? Because for us, we don't see it through a lens of segregation. We see it as you taking care and ownership of how you're going to go about this work. How did the white people respond when they found out that we were operating separately, or did they not know? Did they just kind of come into it?
They did not like it very much at first. Because there's sort of an attitude among white people of the issue that we are aware of, like, well, just tell me what I need to know. And there's also something, I think, there's a little part of white people that sort of thinks that they can experience the pain that you feel, and that will help them understand. And it's just, as you had just said, it's just not right, and it's not fair. It is no person of color's responsibility to teach us how to be better allies, how to be better humans, how to be better citizens. We have to learn on our own. So there was resistance by the white people, a lot of resistance. And these are good people. These are people that care. These are people that are activists. These are smart people. But it's hard, because I think white people, once you start to learn about the white supremacy and how it hurts people of color, they feel a lot of shame, and they feel a lot of guilt. And I learned very quickly that I had to move them off the shame and the guilt as quickly as possible. You didn't do it. You didn't own slaves. You didn't put Jim Crow in place. But we are here, and there's a major problem, and we need to find a way to fix it.
I agree. And I'm really glad that you gave them that space too, though, because oftentimes they're trying to process how they feel and what they're going through while we're there. And oftentimes as they're going through that process, it comes across to us as, white fragility is showing up here. And if we're not careful, there can be confrontation there because people want us to pull back so they can feel comfortable. And we're like, no, why should I have to censor myself in terms of speaking my truth? So I thought it was just a brilliant move. I really do think, I've said this to you before, I think that you created a model that can be used for other groups. And actually, I remember people calling you later once they found out what we were doing in West Bloomfield and trying to get more information about it. So I do hope at this point you've had more people reach out and, try to figure out what are you doing and how do you get the relationships formed. Um, and then after we started having these conversations and talking to each other and developing relationships,
Yes.
we did something absolutely amazing
Yes.
that I'm so proud of.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about our first event
Yes.
and how that unfolded.
Well, our first event was Juneteenth in the WB, as we called it. And when we assembled the full group back together, and as usual, I had no idea what was going to happen. And somebody said, Carolyn Lowe said, I don't want to talk. I'm tired of talking. I want to do something. And we came up with this idea of celebrating National Freedom Day in our township of West Bloomfield, in the heart of our township, for everyone to see. And it was really tricky because it had never been done. It wasn't yet a federal holiday, and it certainly had never been recognized in our township. But all those things, all those pieces started coming together and coming in place when we started working on it. Law enforcement supported us, the public library, Parks and Rec, the school district, everybody came together to work on this event. And it was a little bit tricky to navigate because Juneteenth is sad, but it's also happy. And especially for white people, it's not on us to celebrate. It's on us to commemorate and to honor. And so finding just the right way to honor the day was tricky. And we tried to let the Black members of our committee lead. But as you well know, it was not always easy.
Right. I'm glad you bring that up because I think sometimes our allies think that they have a full understanding of our culture and who we are and what we believe. And I think one of the conversations we had was even about our faith and spirituality and the conservative part of our community that people often don't associate with us. And so we had some really deep conversations that were necessary, not only for, I think, our community and our club, but really in the political circles that we're in so that people could gain a better understanding. So I was really appreciative that we were able to have that conversation too. So talk about some of the challenges that you maybe encountered behind the scenes as we were going through our planning and our discussions and even in the community. What type of response did you get? Because this was the first time ever we were doing something like this.
In the community, it was remarkably welcoming, and that was extremely motivating and heartwarming, and it made me really appreciate West Bloomfield. I'd lived there for 25 years, but I knew my neighbors on the left, my neighbors on the right, my kids went to the high school, and that was about it. But the amount of warmth and support that showed up and showed out for our event was incredibly encouraging. One of the members of our committee is on the township board, and she prepared an entire resolution, and it passed unanimously. And that gave us, I think all of us, so much encouragement that we would be lifted up and supported in this work. Again, the chief of police came out immediately and said, we'll be there, we'll help you with crowd control. The fire department said, we'll offer COVID shots. Whatever you need, we'll make sure that you have. The library made bookmarks with a reading list for Juneteenth. And it just felt like the community embraced our event.
Yes.
So that part was good, but within the committee there was bumps. I mean, one of the things I recall, because Juneteenth is obviously in June, and June is Pride Month, and many of our committee members are longtime political activists, and they thought maybe we should incorporate Pride into Juneteenth. And that was a really, really tough issue to resolve amicably. People felt very strongly. And as you know, the Black community is not a monolith, and there's all kinds of feelings about homosexuality, what I came to learn. We resolved it ultimately, and we decided that Juneteenth is Juneteenth. The focus is on the Black community and honoring Juneteenth, and in the end, consensus was achieved. But the most important lesson I took away from that conversation was that we don't have to be in lockstep on every single issue to be allies.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I also think it's important too that we had that conversation, because what we often experience is that anytime we make up our mind to do something that is centered on Blackness, right? Centered on commemorating something that happened or celebrating something in our culture, people always want to incorporate all these other things. Let's make it all about BIPOC. Let's make it about people of color. Let's make it about, whatever. I think we can stand with one another and any other group that feels marginalized or oppressed in any way, but it's also okay for us to just celebrate us.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
And so I thought that was a very important lesson to learn. And I think it caused us to grow. It's like a marriage. That's what I think about when you have those challenges that come up right from the beginning. I think you grow from that, and I think we did.
Absolutely.
The relationships that I see that exist today are just absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I didn't realize, because we've only been in West Bloomfield now, it's been 4.5 years. I didn't realize at the time how diverse West Bloomfield was.
Right.
I also didn't realize how inclusive and welcoming the community was.
Yes.
And so for me to just kind of go like 3 miles away, literally like 3 miles away, I felt like I was living a completely different experience. And it's hard to articulate how that feels. And so I find myself then 2 years ago and even now, I'm like recruiting people to move to West Bloomfield. I'm like, I know we have a housing crisis, but West Bloomfield is an amazing place.
Yes.
And when our township decided that they were going to support us in that way, I can't tell you the message that sent to the community. I just think we did so many things right,
I could not.
As you reflect upon our first year and our second year, what do you envision for the future? What do you want to do next when it comes to Juneteenth?
That's a really good question. And I just want to add one more thing to what you said, because I could not agree more. I've written dozens and dozens of emails to various people as the chair of the Juneteenth committee. And each time I have to sort of reflect on my message. And the bottom line for me is community building and promoting West Bloomfield as a welcoming community.
Yes.
And how proud I am of that.
Yes, absolutely.
So going forward, I think this is something that you and I have talked about, that I've come to the conclusion, in large part based on our conversations, that empathy is one of the keys to people understanding. And I think Juneteenth helped build empathy by allowing the community to come together and partake in each other's culture and learning in an upbeat atmosphere with music and art and dance and food
and education.
Yes. But I think the conversations that we have among our committee and conversations we open up to the community are very important. To going forward.
Yes, absolutely. So speaking of conversations, I want to shift a little bit to talking about some other work that you and I have done together, which I think was equally difficult, if not even more challenging, to be honest, because we are living in a climate where people are at odds. And we realized that we were at a crisis also within a particular political party, where people weren't feeling heard. And so we talked a lot about how do we engage people who think that they're allies, they would describe themselves as allies. how do we engage them in a conversation that they really aren't quite where they think they are, right? And so you and I talked about focusing on leadership and having you, as a white woman, partner with another white woman to say, okay, let's talk about some do's and don'ts. These are some things that you can say. These are some things you shouldn't say and do. And then engage in conversations. We call them listening sessions with the Black community.
Yep.
I'm really proud that we did that work, and I think it paid off in the long run. And so talk to me a little bit about how you felt when I first approached you and said, let's have listening conversations with the Black community and invite everyone to partake in that. How did you feel?
I mean, terrified, as I often am, wondering how we could make this happen, what kind of format we could have, which again, as we talked about, would not inflict harm upon people of color, and a place where white people would understand that they are supposed to listen, that they are not going to be centered in this event. And that was hard to structure. We put a lot of time and effort into our ground rules, into our format, into our subjects and our questions. Yeah.
There was a lot of intentionality.
Yes.
And I would say, to anyone who would embark upon this, that you have to be very intentional. You have to consider the hearts of the people in the room. At our first session, that was in person. And because that was the first time the organization had ever done anything like this, we had people who struggled a little bit with just listening, right? And being present. Our second event was virtual. And that was the largest, we had the largest participation in any of the sessions the second time. And it's because we invited elected officials, because people said, I want them to not only hear what we have to say, but we want to know where they stand. Because our vote matters. And if you want our vote, we want to make sure that you fully understand what our needs are. So talk to me a little bit about some of your takeaways from that second session. We had 96 people on that call. From Congress members on down.
County officials, state representatives. It was powerful.
Very.
I think it made you and I don't want to speak for you, but it made us see that people, our elected officials, do care, that they do want to engage on the issues, and that they do want to know how the constituents feel. The problem, I think, was sort of translating words and thoughts into actionable items.
Exactly.
The people showed up. They had the right sound bites. They demonstrated, some of them demonstrated understanding, some of them did not, but many of the elected officials did demonstrate understanding of the issues. But then the minute they muted themselves, you kind of felt like they were no longer with us. And when we tried to reach out to them after to work on some of our projects, a lot of times they did not respond with the same enthusiasm as when the camera was on them. And it's been a challenge.
It's definitely a challenge. And I think, I know some people take offense to the word co-conspirator, but we've often used that word co-conspirator to mean you're not just an ally, but you are a person who's standing with us and you're taking action to do the work, right? And we're not standing alone. And I think the struggle is, how do we get people to shift from allyship with making a verbal declaration of who they are to actually putting it in action. And I think a lot of people have decided that allyship is just simply that. It is standing on a platform, giving talking points, and that's it. And
Performative.
It's performative. And we're saying at this point, the Black community expects more from you. We show up, we deliver, we canvas, we do all of these things on a regular basis. Don't show up at our churches just at the time when you're campaigning, right? But we're expecting more.
Oh, it's so interesting that you say that too, because one of the conversations we've been having in real time with current events is, why are certain groups have power and certain groups don't have power? And I'm talking about some of the comments that relate to anti-Semitism, not anti-Semitism, the Black community, the not the Black community. And I think one of the things that will help make the politicians not be performative is the more pressure we can bring to bear on them from more groups of allies. It can't just be the Black community saying, help us. I'm a member of the Jewish community. We in the Jewish community have to step up, and we have to lobby the same Congress people with the same concerns as our brothers and sisters in the Black community. And until we can join forces and get them to listen to all of us, I think we're going to be hard pressed to affect change. I'm a member of an anti-racism task force at my temple, which is called Temple Israel, and it happens to be in West Bloomfield. And we talk about this with my rabbi, who happens to be the co-chair of the Black Jewish Coalition here in Metro Detroit. And I said to her, how do we respond when we're among our ally groups with these charges of anti-Semitism by certain members of the Black community? And she said, I said, how do you deal with it in your work? And she said, in my work, she said, in the Black Jewish Coalition, the other leaders understand that anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. She said, that's not the issue. The part that's put on us in the Jewish community is to step up and do our part to be allies to the Black community, because it's a two-way street.
And how does she define allyship? What does that look like for Temple Israel?
That's a great question. One program that we did recently was working on criminal justice. And we read a book, as Jewish people and white people are often like to do. We read Just Mercy. We had a discussion about it, but we weren't ready to set it down. It really got to us. And they said, let's do a program. Let's do something local. Let's find somebody that can talk to us. And I said, well, I happen to know this gentleman who's in our West Bloomfield Social Justice Committee. He's an outreach coordinator for Safe and Just Michigan, and he's a returning citizen. I said, maybe he'll come and talk to us. Well, one thing led to another. The rabbi ended up meeting with him once, and then twice, and then 3 times.
Wow.
She was so inspired by his story of repentance and redemption and atonement that she ended up speaking from the pulpit on the holiest day of the Jewish year about his story, and shared it with our entire congregation, which is more than 3,500 families. So I think that is one way that we can be allies, is make connections, show humanity toward one another, feel that your problems are our problems, that we're not separate, that what Ronnie went through, we can feel what he went through.
Yes.
And how much he suffered and how much he changed as a person. That is something we can feel ourselves.
Absolutely.
And it's back to that empathy piece again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I definitely believe that Temple Israel is also onto something. And I happen to watch the video of that, and I will highly recommend to the community that if you go to Temple Israel's website, they do have a recording that has been made available. Ronnie Waters is the speaker that we're talking about. I would love to have Ronnie come on the show one day and just share his amazing story. But here's the thing. This is the message that Amy and I are trying to get across to everyone, is that we need to work together. We believe that our democracy is at stake right now. And I'm speaking with this sense of urgency and this tone because we have no more time to wait. We are going to be committed on Agape Social Justice to bring forth a number of speakers who are going to talk about what we can do in social justice and how you can participate in that process as well. So thank you, Amy, for joining us today. I appreciate it. We're going to have to bring you back so we continue some of our other conversations we've been having. And we thank you for our listening audience for joining us today. Stay tuned and we'll bring more to you.